Retired 3 years ago. 31 years with the same civil engineering firm, and on my last day they gave me a plaque and a handshake, and I drove home thinking I'd spend my mornings fishing and my afternoons doing absolutely nothing worth reporting. That was the plan. My son had other ideas about how my retirement would go. His name is Evan. He's 29. He works as a structural inspector for a county office in Flagstaff, Arizona. The kind of job where you show up at 6 in the morning and you're out in the cold by 7 checking load-bearing walls on commercial builds. He's good at it. Methodical, patient, doesn't cut corners. I raised him that way, or at least I tried to. He met Priya at a mutual friend's cookout about 2 years ago. She's the daughter of a family that relocated from Houston to Scottsdale sometime in the mid-90s. And by the time Evan met her, her father, a man named Vincent, had built what I'll call a comfortable real estate portfolio. Not empire-level money, but the kind of money that makes certain people walk into rooms like the room already owes them something. Priya herself was fine. Warm, actually. Laughed easily. She and Evan seemed genuinely good together those first several months, and I'm not someone who says that lightly. I've seen my son in relationships that didn't fit him. This one seemed to. She'd call him just to check in. She remembered things he'd mentioned offhandedly weeks before. When she came to my house for the first time, she brought a pie she made herself, not bought. And she sat with me at the kitchen table for 2 hours talking about her grandmother's garden in Galveston, and I thought, well, this one's different. Then her family got involved. It started small, the way these things always do. Vincent called Evan about 6 months into the relationship, which I thought was a good sign initially. Wanted to have lunch. Father to future son-in-law type of thing. I told Evan to go. Be respectful. It's just a meal. Evan came back from that lunch quieter than usual. I asked how it went and he said, fine, in the way that means the opposite. When I pushed, he told me Vincent had spent most of the meal talking about his properties, his net worth, what Priya was accustomed to, and how he hoped Evan understood the kind of life she'd been raised in. I asked Evan what he said in response. He said he told Vincent that he loved Priya and that he'd work hard to build a good life with her. Vincent apparently nodded slowly and said, we'll see. I didn't like that. But I told Evan to give it time. The second thing that happened was a comment from Priya's mother, a woman named Sylvia, at a dinner the two families had together in Scottsdale sometime last spring. My late wife's sister came with me. She lives nearby and she'd wanted to meet them. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, Sylvia made a remark about Evan's job. Something about how county work was steady at least. She said it pleasantly. The kind of pleasantly that's designed so you can't object without looking oversensitive. My sister-in-law caught my eye across the table and I gave her a small shake of my head. Not here. Not tonight. The third thing was when Priya's older brother, a man named Terrence, added Evan to a group chat without asking. The chat included Vincent, Sylvia, Terrence, and Terrence's wife. The chat was called Family Planning. Evan was the only one in there who wasn't blood or existing family. I thought that was either a good sign or a setup and I didn't know which yet. It turned out to be the second one. Evan proposed to Priya in November. She said yes. He called me from the car afterward and I could hear in his voice that he was happier than he'd been in years. I told him I was proud of him. I meant it. 2 days later, Vincent called and said he wanted to meet with Evan. Just the two of them. Evan went. Vincent had a prenuptial agreement drafted and waiting on his kitchen table. I want to be precise about what was in it because the specifics matter. The agreement was not the standard kind that protects pre-existing assets. It included a clause that would give Vincent and Sylvia approval rights over any major financial decision Evan and Priya made during the marriage. Joint purchases over a certain threshold. Housing decisions. Even career changes. There was language in there about Evan maintaining a certain income level, with a provision that if his salary dropped below a defined amount, for any reason, including layoff, Priya would be entitled to dissolve the marriage and reclaim a percentage of any jointly held assets accumulated during the union. Evan didn't sign it. He came to my house that evening with the document in his hand and set it on my kitchen table, and I read it twice, and then I set it down. I asked him if Priya knew what was in it. He said he didn't think so. I said he needed to talk to her. He did, and Priya's response, from what he told me, was that her father was just being careful, that it wasn't personal, that if Evan loved her, he'd understand. I don't think she'd read it either. I think she'd been told it was standard. I think she trusted her father's version of it. That's the most charitable interpretation, and I'm going to stick with it. But the conversation between them didn't fully resolve. It became the background hum of the next several weeks. Evan kept asking for more time. Vincent kept calling. Terrence started texting Evan directly with comments about how the family just wanted to protect Priya, how it wasn't a reflection on Evan personally, how everyone signs these now. I watched my son shrink a little during those weeks. Not dramatically, but I know him. I know the way he carries tension in his shoulders. I know what his voice sounds like when he's managing something he hasn't figured out yet. The breaking point came in February. Priya's family had a tradition, a winter trip to a cabin property they own near Payson, up in the Tonto National Forest. They invited Evan. He went. I remember thinking it was a good sign, that maybe things had softened, that maybe the prenup conversation had reached some kind of quiet understanding. I told him to have a good time. He texted me when he got there. The photos he sent looked like a real place. Snow on the pine trees, a fire going, the kind of weekend that looks right. On the second night, they went for a drive. Vincent said he wanted to show Evan a particular overlook he liked, about 8 miles up a forest road. The road was unpaved. Evan rode in the back of Vincent's truck with Terrence. Priya and her mother rode up front with Vincent. At the overlook, they all got out. Evan said it was genuinely beautiful, the kind of view you can't manufacture. He took a photo. He said he remembers thinking that maybe this trip was the thaw he'd been waiting for. Then Vincent said he wanted to go back and check on the fire and they should head back. They got in the truck. All of them except Evan. Evan said he hadn't realized they were leaving until he heard the engine. He turned and the truck was already moving. He called out. He waved. He watched the headlights disappear around the bend. It was 17 degrees. He had no hat. He'd left his heavier jacket in the cabin because it was warm inside, and he'd only grabbed a mid-layer for what he thought was a short walk at an overlook. His phone had partial signal. Enough to send texts, but not enough for a reliable call. He texted Priya immediately. No response. He texted Terrence. Nothing. He tried calling Vincent's number and it went to voicemail. He started walking. He walked for about 40 minutes along the edge of the road before a car came from the other direction. A retired couple from Prescott who were heading out after a weekend at their own property nearby. They stopped. They let him in. The woman gave him her husband's fleece from the back seat. They drove him the 8 miles back to the main road and waited with him while he figured out what to do. His phone came back to full signal at the bottom of the forest road. He called me. I was asleep. It was 11:15. I answered because it was Evan, and Evan doesn't call after 10 unless something is wrong. He told me what happened. I sat on the edge of my bed and I listened without saying anything until he finished. Then I asked him where he was right now. He told me. I said, "Don't go back to the cabin." I drove to Payson that night. It's about 2 hours from where I live. I got there a little after 1 in the morning and I found my son at an all-night diner near the highway, sitting in a corner booth with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He looked exhausted and cold and something else. Something I recognized as the particular kind of hurt that comes not from danger, but from the moment you realize someone you trusted made a deliberate choice. He said they'd texted him while he was walking. Priya had. The text said, "We thought you needed some time to think. Don't be dramatic." I drove home that night with my son in the passenger seat, and I told him 2 things. The first was that I was glad he was safe. The second was that we were going to handle this carefully and correctly, and that he should let me make 1 phone call in the morning. His name is Roger. He's my younger brother. He retired from the Air Force after 22 years as a JAG officer, Judge Advocate General, which is the military's legal corps, and since then he's been in private practice in Phoenix. Family law, civil litigation, occasionally some things that don't fit neatly into either category. He has a very specific and well-developed understanding of how deliberate harm gets documented, how liability gets established, and how people who believe they're untouchable discover that they aren't. Priya's family had never met Roger. They didn't know he existed. They hadn't asked. I called him at 7 that morning. I told him everything. He asked me 3 questions, very precise, about the temperature, the location, and whether Evan had any documentation of the texts. Then he was quiet for a moment. "Send me screenshots of everything," he said. "Don't let Evan respond to anyone until I've looked at this." Over the next week, Roger built a picture, the screenshots of the texts, including Priya's "Don't be dramatic" message, and a later one from Terrence saying they'd given him space to reflect, were a start. But Roger also found out a few other things. The overlook was on a documented forest road that the county had flagged as high risk in winter conditions. There have been 2 incidents on that road in the past 4 years, involving people caught out in the cold. That information was public record. The temperature that night had dropped to 14 degrees by midnight. Evan had been out there for nearly 45 minutes. His knee, he'd had minor surgery on it 8 months prior, had started to stiffen badly in the cold. He'd been limping by the time the couple from Prescott stopped. Roger also looked at the group chat. Evan had never left it. And in the group chat, 3 days before the trip, there was a message from Vincent. It said that if Evan still had him committed to the agreement by the end of the weekend, they'd had a long conversation about whether this engagement was worth continuing to support. Terrence had replied, "Agreed. One way or another, it resolves." Sylvia had replied with a single thumbs up. Priya had not responded to that thread. I read that exchange sitting at Roger's desk in his Phoenix office. Roger watched me read it and didn't say anything until I looked up. "They planned it," I said. "That's what the documentation suggests," he said. "What followed was not quick, and I won't pretend it was simple." Roger filed a civil complaint against Vincent and Terrence for reckless endangerment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. In Arizona, abandoning someone in hazardous conditions when you have created a reasonable expectation of their safe return can constitute actionable recklessness. The county road documentation and weather records established the conditions. The group chat established the intent. Vincent hired an attorney who was, from what Roger told me, reasonably good. They argued that Evan had voluntarily joined the outing, that no one had physically prevented him from writing back, that the temperature was manageable, and that the family's communication afterward was poorly worded but not malicious. Roger's response to the temperature argument was the medical record from Evan's knee surgery and a deposition from the couple from Prescott who described his condition when they found him: limping, visibly cold, inadequately dressed for extended outdoor exposure at that temperature. The wife had taken a photo on her phone when they got back to the main road. One of those instinctive documentation things people do now. Evan was standing in the diner parking lot. You could see, even in that light, that he was not okay. The case did not go to a full jury trial. Vincent's attorney contacted Roger 4 months in and indicated their clients were interested in settlement discussions. I think the group chat was the thing they didn't want in open court. The one way or another it resolves message from Terrence. The thumbs up from Sylvia. Those are the kinds of things that look different in a courtroom than they sound in your own head when you're typing them. The settlement was confidential in terms of its exact figure, but I can tell you it covered Evan's medical costs from the knee complications that developed after that night, his legal fees, and an amount that Roger described as meaningful when I asked him to characterize it without giving me the number. Vincent and Terrence were also required, as part of the agreement, to sign a statement acknowledging that Evan had been placed in a hazardous situation during the trip. They didn't want to sign that. Their attorney pushed back on it for almost 3 weeks. Roger didn't move. In the end, they signed it. I want to say something about Priya, because I think it's the part that doesn't resolve cleanly, and I'd be dishonest if I wrapped it up like it did. She called Evan twice during the legal process. He didn't answer the first time. He answered the second time, and she talked for a long time, from what he told me, about how she hadn't known the extent of what her father and Terrence had planned. How she'd thought it was just a conversation they wanted to force. How she'd been raised to trust her father's judgment, and she hadn't questioned it the way she should have. She was crying by the end, Evan said. He listened. He let her finish. Then he told her he believed that she hadn't planned it herself, and that it didn't change what she'd texted him while he was walking in the cold on a forest road at night. Don't be dramatic. That he'd been limping and freezing, and her text was, "Don't be dramatic." She didn't have an answer for that. He told me she said she was sorry, and that it wasn't enough, and they both knew it. The engagement ended without a formal announcement. There was no scene, no confrontation. It just stopped being something. Evan is doing well now. He transferred to a different county office, one closer to Tucson, and he bought a small house down there about 5 months ago. He called me from the driveway on the day he got the keys, just to tell me. He didn't say much. Neither did I. We stayed on the phone for a few minutes anyway. I've thought about what Roger said to me in his office the last time we met about the case. I'd asked him whether he thought Vincent had genuinely believed he could get away with it, or whether he just never stopped to think through what getting away with it would actually require. Roger thought about it for a moment. "Those are the same thing," he said. "People who do something like this don't have a plan for accountability. They just assume it won't exist." I spent 31 years in civil engineering. I worked on bridges, retaining walls, support systems that most people drive past without a second thought. The discipline teaches you something specific about failure, that the structures most likely to collapse catastrophically are not the ones that look obviously compromised. They're the ones that have been loaded past capacity gradually, over time, while continuing to pass every visual check. They look stable right up until the moment the wrong load comes along, and they don't. I thought about that when I signed the paperwork at Roger's office. Some things hold, some things only looked like they would. I've thought a lot about the sequence of choices that led to that night on the forest road. Not just Vincent's choices or Terrence's, but every small decision that came before it, including some of my own. When Vincent made that first comment about Priya being accustomed to a certain life, I told Evan to give it time. When Sylvia said county work was steady at least, I caught my sister-in-law's eye and shook my head. Not here. When the prenup landed on Evan's kitchen table, with its control clauses and its income thresholds, I told Evan to talk to Priya and see if she understood what was in it. Each time, I chose patience over confrontation. I still think those were reasonable choices in the moment, but I also think that every time a boundary gets crossed without consequence, the person crossing it takes note. They recalibrate. They learn what they can get away with, and then they push a little further. That's not a religious idea. It's just how behavior works. Actions that meet no resistance tend to repeat and escalate. Vincent and Terrence didn't arrive at leave him on a mountain road at 14 degrees in one step. They arrived there after a series of smaller moments that told them the cost of their behavior was low. What I know about Evan is that he handled every part of this with more steadiness than I would have managed at his age. He didn't go back to that cabin. He didn't send the angry texts that I suspect he wanted to send. He sat in a diner booth with cold hands and waited for me, and when I got there, he told me what happened as plainly as he could. That kind of restraint isn't passivity. It's a form of intelligence, knowing that the way you respond in the first hours after something like this matters enormously for what comes after. And what came after was Roger. My brother spent 22 years learning exactly how accountability gets built from evidence, how documentation turns a misunderstanding into something that cannot be dismissed. The group chat didn't lie. The weather records didn't lie. The photo that woman from Prescott took in the diner parking lot didn't lie. Vincent and Terrence had built their confidence on the assumption that there would be no record, no witness, no one who knew how to use what existed. They were wrong on all three counts. I think about integrity not as a virtue you perform for other people, but as something structural. The thing that determines how you hold up when the load gets heavy. Evan has it. He's had it since he was a kid, who'd come tell me directly when he'd broken something rather than wait to be caught. That quality didn't protect him from what happened on that road. But it's the reason he came through it without becoming bitter, without letting it reshape him into someone suspicious and closed. He bought a house in Tucson. He called me from the driveway. He didn't say much, and neither did I, and that was exactly right. What I hope anyone takes from this is simple. Document things. Know who is actually in your corner, and pay attention to the small moments when someone shows you how they weigh your value against their convenience. Because those moments are not isolated. They are the structure. And structure, as I learned in 31 years of engineering, tells you everything about what a thing will do under pressure.